Hello everybody, in this video we are going to find the linear, quadratic, and exponential regressions using our calculator. So as you can see here on the screen, I have steps on what to do first, second, third, all the way to the end to find specific regressions. Now it does matter whether we're dealing with a linear, quadratic, and exponential regression. We're going to do most of the steps the same for all three of them, except for when we select what kind of regression we need. So with that being said, I do want to point out that I will be doing these steps on a TI Nspire calculator. So I'll show you where to go and how to enter all this information to find those regressions. So in this video, we're going to focus on just the linear regression. So let's go ahead and talk about how to do that from start to finish. Alright, so I'm not going to read the steps to you. You can go back in this video or look at your notes to see what step 1, 2, and 3 is. I'm actually going to show you how to do it with the calculator. So the first thing I'm going to point out about this problem, when you're dealing with a problem that has to do with regressions, the first thing we have to do is figure out what kind of regression we're going to use, because there's 3 kinds. Now, even though it doesn't matter at the beginning, we will need to know this information at the end. So if you're looking at this problem on the screen with me, you're going to see that this one says that these points that they gave us represent a linear function. So that automatically tells us that we're trying to find a linear regression, and we're trying to set it up as a linear equation. So with that being said, we have all these points, and because we're going to organize these points in a table in our calculator, I'm going to go ahead and organize them on my paper. So I'm going to create an XY table and then add these points to it, so it makes it a little bit easier to add to my calculator. This step is not necessary, but I feel like it helps keep us organized. Alright, so as you can see here, I did create my table. I did add my X and my Y values because this is what we're going to be doing on our calculator. Now, before I jump in and turn on the calculator and go over a couple things, I do want to point out, because we're finding a linear equation or an equation to represent this linear function, that our linear equation is going to be in this form right here, which is y is equal to mx plus b. And so basically we're trying to figure out what the m of our line is and what the y-intercept, or the b in this case, is, so we can plug those numbers in. Now our calculator will take these values that we type in and give us the best representation of slope and y-intercept for this line. So let's go ahead and grab our calculator. We're going to go ahead and turn it on. And we're going to be in our home screen right here. So here's our home screen, and so there's a couple things that I want to point out. When we're doing linear regressions, we're going to have to enter these values into a table, or in this case a spreadsheet. So I'm going to ask you to go down to the very bottom, and we're going to go here to lists and spreadsheets. I'm going to hit enter, and keep in mind, if you already have something here, you can always hit this little X right here to kind of clear out any extra ones. So we can start with a blank sheet. Now there's several ways to do this, but this is the one that I find to be, for me, the easiest way. So what I'm going to go to the very top, and I'm going to name column A as my X's. And you can actually type in specifically what it represents, but I'm just going to stick with X and Y. And then I'm going to add all the X values. Make sure that when you add the X values, you don't start here, but you start with row 1. So I'm going to type in 6, enter, and then I'm going to type the rest of them in here. So every time I enter a number, I'm just going to hit that number and enter, and it's going to take me to the next part. So once I've entered all of my X's, I'm going to ask you to do the exact same thing with your Y's. So I'm going to go all the way up, and I'm going to label column B as Y. So I'm just going to hit Y, enter, and then I'm going to go down here to row 1 and add all my Y values exactly the same way. Just hit the number, enter, and then it just takes you all the way down. Take your time here. Make sure you're not leaving off a negative or typing something in incorrectly, so we don't have to redo this part. So I'm going to continue to add the Y values. Alright, so once you're complete with all of your X and your Y values, I'm actually going to go to the top. And even though this isn't essential, I think it's a little bit easier to see the numbers that we're going to be looking for if we go back to the top of our screen. All right, so once you have X and Y typed in, everything's labeled, we're actually going to use our menu. So right here you can see menu. We're going to hit menu here. We're going to hit 4 because we want statistics. We're going to either hit 1 or enter. And it's going to give us a list of what kind of regression we want to do. So this is where I'm telling you it's important to know what kind of function we're working with, because we need it to match. So if you look at the screen, you're going to see that we have 2 linear regressions. We have one that's mx plus b. That's the one we want. And then we have another one. So far I've only used linear regression, the mx plus b one. So I'm just going to stick with that one. And I'm not exactly sure in what situation we would use 4, but I've only used 3. So I'm going to go ahead and hit 3 on the keypad, or you can go down and hit enter. And this is where I'm going to ask y'all to be a little bit careful. If you're new with the TI Nspire, as I am, I realize that sometimes I do some things that I don't intend. So I'm going to ask you to take your cursor and hit this little arrow right here so you can tell your calculators where your X values are. And then you're going to hit this little arrow right here, and you're going to scroll down so you can tell your calculator where your Y values are at. Now, you don't have to call it X and Y. You can actually label them like time and height or whatever you have in that table, but I just find it easier to use X and Y. Now, once you have told your calculator where your X and Y values are, just hit enter. Everything else can stay the same, just hit enter. Now you're going to notice by going to the top of your screen, we have all these numbers in our table. So with that being said, I do want to remind you that the only thing we're looking for in this equation, I'm going to move this over, is in order to write the linear function, we need the m value and the b value. That's it. So we can plug them in. And if you look on your screen, it specifically tells you what your m value is, and then right below it, it tells you what your b value is. So we just need to take these numbers and plug them into the equation. So I'm actually going to round 2 decimal places. And so for this one, we're going to say negative 0.75. And because it's the m, it's going to have the x value. Okay, it's really important that you use this x, especially for the next step. All right, we need to go ahead and add our b value, which it tells us is 5.78. Let's just leave it at 5.78. And so, number 1, we use our calculator to find the equation of the best equation for these points. Now, if you look at part B, it's telling us use the equation, which is this one right here, to find the value of y when x is 20. So they specifically tell us that x is equal to 20. So here's my x. I'm just going to replace it with a 20. So I'm going to rewrite it down here. Y is equal to negative 0.75. X is equal to 20 plus 5.78. Now, you can go ahead and do it by hand. You can do it however you want. If you're going to use your calculator, then I suggest once you write down your equation, I'm going to go ahead and hit this little X right here so that way if I do another regression, I don't have to clear out my X and my Y. So I'm just going to hit this, and I'm going to say, no, I don't want to save it. And it takes me back to the home screen. So from here, I'm going to hit A to calculate, and I'm just going to do a negative 0.75. In parentheses, I'm going to put 20 plus 5.78. Once I make sure I typed it in correctly, I'm going to hit enter, and it automatically tells me what my y is. Y is equal to negative 9.22. So if my x value is 20, my y value is negative 9.22, I can actually write this as an ordered pair. And there you go. All right, let's go ahead and look at a different type of problem. So if you look at this one right here, you're going to notice that it's the exact same thing. Okay, we're talking about a table. This is our x's. These are our y's. And we can go through the same steps. So I'm actually going to do that one, but I'm going to do it fairly quickly. And then we're going to look at one that is considered an arithmetic sequence and how we can use linear regressions to find those as well. All right, so the table has already been created for us. We know it's a linear function because it specifically tells us. So we're just going to do the exact same thing. So I'm going to ask you guys to go back down to lists and spreadsheets. And since we deleted this before we left our screen, notice it gives me a blank new page. So I'm going to go, I'm just going to hit no. It does that again. Okay, I'm going to go back to the top, label this X, and then type in all my numbers. I'm going to do the same thing with B, type in Y, and then type in these numbers. So I'm going to do that quickly. All right, so a couple things that I want to point out. I went ahead and paused and then created this. Please make sure you're not typing anything here. So when you start entering X and Y, make sure you're starting with row 1. Also, make sure that this box is out of the way. So if your last number is 70, go ahead and move out of that box so your calculator can register that. And I personally like going back to the top of my list, so that way everything I need is already on the screen. So I'm going to go ahead and hit menu. Remember, this is a linear function, so we're going to hit 4 for statistics, 1, and then our linear function is 3. Okay. From here, I like using the scroll pad. It just makes it a little bit easier. My X's, I labeled X. My Y's, I labeled Y's. And then I'm going to hit enter, and notice that I didn't have to scroll up to find this information. It was already there. So from here, I can see what my M value is, I can see what my B value is, and I can write it as an equation. So I'm going to go ahead and write this as Y is equal to MX plus B with these values. All right, so as you can see, here's my M value. My M should have the X, and then here's the B value at the end. So this one right here is telling us to predict the number of hot apple ciders from the cafe will sell on a day with a high temperature of 92 degrees. So we now know that our X value is equal to 92 degrees, and so we can replace the X in the equation with 92. So we're going to go ahead and rewrite it, plug in 92 for X. We're going to type it into our calculator and get our answer. All right, so as you can see here, I rewrote it. And before I leave this screen, I highly recommend, once you write everything down, go ahead and hit X, tell them you don't want to save it, and it takes you back to the screen you were going to go to anyways. I'm going to hit calculate, and then I'm going to type this in to figure out what the Y value would be. All right, so as you can see here, I typed it all in. I made sure it was correct and that I didn't leave off a decimal somewhere. So when I hit enter, it tells me it's 4.79. So if our X value is 92, then our Y value is 4.79, which I can also write as an ordered pair. And there you go. All right, so let's go ahead and look at arithmetic sequences real quick. All right, to be honest, I don't think we have enough time in this video to do arithmetic sequences with me being able to explain some key parts. So we're actually going to stop right here. I hope that you feel a little bit better about using your calculator to find linear regressions and kind of some of the buttons that we have to push to get us there. I will see you in the next videos so we can talk about these arithmetic sequences, but we can also talk about quadratic and exponential regressions. I'll see you guys in the next videos.